My name is Avery Carter. I'm 29 years old, and 2 months ago, my mother called me the night before my sister's engagement dinner to tell me not to come. Not because I'd done anything wrong, not because there was a conflict I didn't know about. She said, "Avery Carter." And I remember this exactly because I read the text 4 times before I set my phone face down on the counter. The venue has a strict head count, and we've already confirmed with the restaurant. It would just be easier if you sat this one out, you understand? Avery Carter. I understood. I'd been understanding for 26 years. My sister is 2 years older than me. Growing up, she was the one who got the birthday parties with the color-coordinated invitations, the one whose college acceptance letter got framed in the hallway, the one my mother described to strangers as our achiever. I was just the younger one, the one who got quiet, the one who, somewhere around age 12, stopped asking to be included and started building something else instead. What I built, nobody in my family ever bothered to ask about. 3 weeks ago, I was sitting in my apartment in Nashville when my phone buzzed with a call from my grandmother. She never calls unless something has happened. Her voice was shaking in a way I hadn't heard since my grandfather died, except this time it wasn't grief. It was something closer to disbelief. Avery Carter, why didn't you tell any of us? Avery Carter, she said, and I said, Avery Carter, tell you what, Grandma? Avery Carter, she said, Avery Carter, honey, it's in the newspaper, let me go back. Avery Carter. I grew up in a household where ambition was not distributed equally. My mother was precise about it in a way she probably didn't even realize. She just had a preference, the way some people prefer one color over another, and she organized her life around that preference. My sister got new clothes for the first day of school every year. I got her hand-me-downs until I was old enough to buy my own. This is not a complaint about poverty. We were comfortable. It was a choice. A small one, maybe, but small choices repeated for 18 years add up to something you can measure. The one thing I had that nobody paid attention to was my palate. I know that sounds strange, but I grew up being the kid who could tell the difference between the tomato sauce my mother made in the summer when she used tomatoes from the garden and the sauce she made in the winter from a can. I could taste when the butter in a recipe was salted versus unsalted. I knew when a dish needed acid and when it needed fat. My mother thought this was annoying. My sister thought it was weird. My father, who was not a particularly unkind man, but was also not a perceptive one, just thought I was picky. By the time I was 17, I knew I wanted to cook professionally. Not home cooking, not catering, real cooking, restaurant cooking, the kind where you stay awake at 2 in the morning thinking about a sauce and you write it down in the dark so you don't forget. I told my parents when I was applying to colleges. My mother's response was to print out a list of pre-law programs at 3 different universities. My father's said, Avery Carter cooking is a nice hobby. Avery Carter. My sister, who was 19 at the time and already engaged to a man she would eventually divorce, said, Avery Carter, you'd be on your feet all day. Doesn't that sound exhausting? Avery Carter. I applied to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, New York. I didn't tell anyone until I was accepted. Even then, nobody framed the letter. I worked through my entire program, 2 part-time jobs, student loans, a shared apartment with 4 other students where we all practiced on each other constantly, where Tuesday nights were free-for-all tasting dinners, and someone was always burning something at midnight. It was the first place I'd ever felt entirely at home. After graduation, I staged at 3 restaurants in New York, unpaid, the way you do when you're building something and you don't have the luxury of being impatient. Then, I got a paid position at a French-Japanese restaurant in the West Village, working under a chef who communicated almost entirely in the language of what was wrong and almost never in what was right, and who was, without question, the best teacher I've ever had. 3 years later, he recommended me to a colleague in Nashville who was opening something new. I moved. I took the sous chef position. 18 months after that, I was made head chef. The restaurant's name is Wisteria. I didn't tell my family about any of it, not because I was hiding, but because they'd stopped asking a long time ago, and I'd stopped offering things to people who didn't want them. My mother knew I cooked. She described it to people the same way she'd described it when I was 17. Nora does something in restaurants. Occasionally, she works in a kitchen somewhere. Once, at a family gathering I actually attended, she said to her friend, "Avery Carter, we keep hoping she'll find something more stable, but you know how it is with creative types." Avery Carter. Her friend nodded sympathetically. I smiled and went back to the kitchen to help with the dishes, because old habits are hard to break. My sister's engagement dinner was at Hargrove, which is one of the better restaurants in the city where my family lives, about 40 minutes from Nashville. My brother-in-law-to-be is a pleasant, uncomplicated man who sells commercial real estate and coaches youth soccer on weekends. My sister had been with him for 2 years when she called to tell me she was engaged. Her exact words were, "Avery Carter, we're having a dinner at Hargrove next Saturday, and I wanted you to know so you don't accidentally make other plans." Avery Carter. I had not been invited. She was letting me know so I wouldn't feel bad about not being included. The consideration was almost kind. 2 days before the dinner, my mother sent the text about the head count. I didn't respond. I went to work. Here is what I didn't know on the night of my sister's engagement dinner. 2 things were happening simultaneously that I had nothing to do with. The first, Food and Wine magazine had published that morning their annual list of best new chefs in America. I had been named to it. The full feature had gone live on their website at 8 in the morning, which included a profile piece, 4 photographs, and a quote I'd given to the writer 3 months earlier when I'd agreed to the interview, and then promptly forgotten about because I do not find it easy to sit still and talk about myself, and I am far more comfortable moving. The quote said, "Avery Carter, I learned to cook in a family where no one really saw me. That's probably why I cook the way I do. Everything I make to be noticed. Avery Carter." The second, Hargrove, the restaurant where my sister's engagement dinner was being held, had sourced 3 of its signature dishes that night, 2 appetizers and the featured entree from Wisteria's sister supplier, a small farm outside Nashville that we'd helped put on the map. The restaurant's head of operations, a woman who'd eaten at Wisteria twice and knew exactly who I was, had included a note in the evening's menu cards. The note mentioned my name. I was at work when my phone started ringing. I ignored it. I'm always at work, and I almost always ignore my phone during service. It was a Tuesday. We had a full reservation list and 2 private parties. I didn't look at my messages until nearly 11. There were 14 missed calls, 6 from my mother, 3 from my grandmother, 2 from a number I didn't recognize, which turned out to be my aunt calling from a new phone, 1 from my sister, which she'd followed with a voicemail that lasted 47 seconds, and which I'll come back to. I sat down on the step outside the kitchen's back door, still in my chef's whites, and called my grandmother back first. She answered on the first ring. "Avery, why didn't you tell any of us?" Avery. And that's when I found out. She read me the Food and Wine piece over the phone. She's 73 years old, and she read it to me slowly, every word, while I sat on a concrete step in the alley behind my restaurant at 11:15 at night, holding my phone with both hands. When she finished, she said, "Avery, honey, you are extraordinary. Do you know that?" I said, "Avery, thank you, Grandma." She said, "I have been telling people for years that you'd do something important. I just didn't know what to tell them. Now I know." I want to tell you what happened at my sister's engagement dinner because I wasn't there, but I heard about it in pieces. From my grandmother, from my aunt, who called the next morning with barely concealed delight, from my cousin, who had attended as a +1, and who texted me a voice memo at 1 in the morning that was as mostly her whispering and laughing at the same time. The dinner was scheduled for 7. 30 guests, mostly family on both sides, and a few of my future brother-in-law's work colleagues. My mother had chosen Hargrove specifically because she wanted somewhere that felt elevated, somewhere that would impress his family, who apparently had money in a way that made my mother self-conscious and therefore aspirational. The menu cards were placed on the tables before the guests arrived. This is when the evening began to diverge from my mother's plan. My future brother-in-law's older sister, a woman who I have since learned is a food writer for a regional magazine and takes restaurants very seriously, picked up the menu card and read the supplier note. She looked up. She said, "Avery," to no one in particular. "Is anyone here related to Avery Carter?" My mother said, "Avery. I'm sorry." She showed her the card. Avery Carter. She was just named to the Food and Wine Best New Chef list. Her restaurant supplied part of this menu. That's actually quite impressive. My mother looked at the card. She looked at my sister. She looked back at the card. "Avery Carter Voss is my maiden name. Avery Carter," she said finally. "Avery Carter. Is she your daughter?" "Avery Carter." There was a pause. According to my cousin, it lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer. "Avery Carter. She's our younger one." "Avery Carter," my mother said. "Avery Carter. She's in the food industry." "Avery Carter." My future brother-in-law's family, 7 of them, all seated at the same end of the table, had pulled up the food and wine article on their phones by the time the first course arrived. The profile photograph, taken in Wisteria's kitchen, shows me in my chef's coat standing in front of the pass, not smiling exactly, but looking directly at the camera with the kind of expression that says, "I know exactly where I am, and I earned it." Apparently, one of his cousins turned the phone screen around and showed it to my sister and said, "Avery Carter. She looks like you. This is your sister." "Avery Carter," my sister said. "Avery Carter." "Yes." Avery Carter. Her voice, according to my cousin, sounded like a door closing. Here is what my mother did next, and I know this because my aunt was sitting close enough to hear. She leaned toward the woman beside her, my future brother-in-law's mother, and said in a low voice that was not quite low enough, "Avery Carter. We're very proud of her, of course. She's always been the independent one. Doesn't really stay in touch, but that's just her nature. You know how some children are." "Avery Carter." The woman nodded politely. My aunt, who has never in my memory stayed quiet when she had the option of speaking, said from across the table, "Avery Carter. She stays in touch with me, and with Mom. And last I heard, she'd invited all of you to visit the restaurant twice, and nobody went." Avery Carter. My mother's smile thinned. "Avery Carter. That's not... And didn't she send you a reservation for your birthday last year? I remember because she called me to ask for your schedule." Avery Carter. This is true. I had called the restaurant I work at, my restaurant, and arranged for my mother and father and sister to have dinner there on me. My mother had said she'd think about it. They never came. The table had gotten quiet in that specific way that happens when people who don't know each other well suddenly find themselves witnessing something they weren't expecting. My future brother-in-law cleared his throat. "He is, as I've mentioned, a pleasant man." He said, "Avery Carter. We'll have to make a reservation ourselves. I've heard Wisteria is excellent." Avery Carter. My sister said nothing. The rest of the dinner continued. Courses came and went. The food was good, I'm told, including the entree that partially owed its ingredients to the farm I'd helped develop. At some point, the table conversation shifted, as it will, to other things. But the article didn't go away. By the end of the evening, 4 different guests had congratulated my mother on having a daughter who had just been named one of the best new chefs in the country. Each time she said some version of, "Yes, Avery Carter, we're very proud, Avery Carter," in a tone that sounded like she was reading from a script she'd been handed 30 seconds before the curtain went up. My sister's engagement was not the main topic of conversation at her engagement dinner. I don't say that to be cruel. I didn't do anything to make that happen. I just existed. I worked. And the work existed whether anyone was watching or not. The voicemail my sister left was 47 seconds long. The first 5 seconds were silence. Then, "I don't know how you managed to make this about yourself without even being here, but somehow you did. I hope you're happy." Another pause. Then her voice dropped. "Food and wine, Nora? You couldn't have told me?" She hung up. I listened to it twice, then I deleted it. I didn't make anything about myself. I just didn't hide. I called my grandmother back the next morning and we talked for an hour. She told me she'd had Hartgrove Nigian wrong for 10 years, had been telling people I worked at a place called Hartgrove, which does not exist. She laughed when she said it. I laughed too. She said, "I should have asked more. I should have asked you directly instead of just trusting what your mother said." I told her she hadn't done anything wrong. She said, "Will you cook for me sometime at your restaurant?" I said, "Grandma, I'll cook for you anywhere you want." She said, "Good, because I think I've been missing out." My mother called 2 days after the dinner. I let it go to voicemail. She left a message that was, in its own way, a masterpiece of not saying the thing that needed to be said. She said she hoped I was well. She said the dinner had been lovely. She said she thought we should catch up sometime soon. She said, "Near the end, I know we haven't always been as supportive as we could have been. I think that's just been a communication issue." A communication issue? I listened to the message while I was prepping for lunch service, my hands moving through the familiar rhythm of the morning mise en place, the smell of butter in the pan, garlic just starting to go translucent. I set my phone down on the counter, and I did not call her back. My father texted a week later. "He has never been a man who calls when a text is available," he said. "Saw the article. Looks like things are going well for you. Your mother and I would like to visit the restaurant sometime if you're open to it." I read it on my break, standing outside with my coffee going cold. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an acknowledgement of the dinner invitation they declined, or the years of "she works in a kitchen somewhere," or the engagement dinner I hadn't been invited to. It was just a door opened slightly. I sat with that text for almost 2 weeks before I answered, and when I did, I wrote, "I'd like that. Text me when you're planning to be in Nashville and I'll make a reservation." Not forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe not ever in the way that word usually works, but a possibility, a small one. The kind you hold lightly with both hands, the way you hold something that might break if you grip it too hard. My sister has not contacted me. I've thought about what to say to her when she does, and I've come to the conclusion that I don't need to have the speech prepared. I don't need a moment. The truth doesn't need staging. It's already happened. What I know is this. I spent years cooking in rooms where nobody from my family came to see me. I sent invitations that went unanswered. I made a career that nobody asked about, and none of that stopped me. None of it slowed me down. If anything, the silence was its own kind of freedom. Nobody was watching, so there was no one to disappoint. You build differently when you build without an audience. I'm standing in my kitchen at Wisteria right now. It's 6:30 in the morning, 2 hours before any of my line cooks arrive, and the light through the east-facing window is that particular pale gold you only get in October. The farmer's market delivery came 40 minutes ago. There's a flat of late-season strawberries on the counter that I'm going to do something with. I'm not sure what yet. I'll figure it out. On the wall by the pass, there's a frame I put up 2 months ago. It holds a printout of the food and wine feature, not because I need the validation. I know what I do. I know what it costs. I know what it took. I put it there so I can see it on the mornings when the kitchen is quiet and the work is just beginning, and remind myself that this happened, that it was real, that I built it from a place where nobody was looking. If you're in the middle of your own years of that, cooking or building or writing or doing the work that nobody in your family bothers to ask about, I want to say something to you directly. It is enough to be seen by your work. It is enough to build something that knows your name, even when the people who should know it don't bother to learn it. The recognition will come, or it won't. The family will understand, or they won't. But the thing you're building is real regardless. Don't cook for their applause. Cook because the food is honest and the work is true, and somewhere in a dining room you haven't imagined yet, someone is going to take one bite and feel exactly what you meant. That's enough. That has always been enough. The strawberries are waiting. The kitchen is mine, and for the first time in a long time, I don't need anyone's invitation to stand in the rooms I've built for myself.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. I truly appreciate your comments, feedback, and thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. See you again in the next stories.